All right.
All right, so welcome everyone. I am Danielle Parker. I'm the director for the Preservation Alliance of West Virginia. And I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us in our webinar that we're hosting as part of the Historic Preservation Virtual Conference Series. So for those who weren't able to join us in May, thanks for coming today. And our topic will be understanding multi-property documentation surveys. So I will pass it over to Cody, who will be giving the presentation today, and just want to say thank you all. And if you have questions at any point, you can put those in the chat, and we're going to go over those toward the end of the presentation is how we've been doing that. So, okay, take it away, Cody. I'm
All
here.
right. Thank you. Thank you, Danielle. Okay, I'm unmuted. So my name is Cody Straley. I'm the National Register and Architectural Survey Coordinator for the West Virginia State Historic Preservation Office, which is a mouthful. And today I'll be discussing multiple property documentations for National Register properties. And this is better if you have a working knowledge of the National Register of Historic Places already, but if you don't, I'm happy to discuss that at the end of the presentation. I'll try and keep this under an hour since I know this is a lot of people's lunchtime. So what we'll be discussing, we'll discuss what is a multiple property documentation, or an MPD for short. What are the things that go in an MPD form? And as an example, we'll do a case study for a recent MPD our office did on meal pouch tobacco barns in the state. So what is an MPD? The National Park Service defines an MPD as a document that serves as a basis for evaluating the National Register eligibility of related properties. So it's a cover document. It provides background information on the importance of a specific group of properties and explains what makes them eligible to be on the National Register. An MPD doesn't nominate properties to the register on its own, but it is intended to make nominations easier for that specific kind of property. A couple different terms to know. If you're looking at MPD stuff, you might see some of these terms thrown out here, especially in older documents. I'll briefly mention what each one is. A multiple property listing refers to the overall thematic group or framework, the common historical theme that links these MPD properties together. A multiple property submission is what you call when you have nominations connected to an MPD for the National Register. A multiple resource area is an older term you might see in older paperwork. It refers to the geographical area that an MPD encompasses. And then MPDs are written on a document called a multiple property documentation form, or MPDF, also referred to as a multiple property cover or a cover document. But for simplicity, I'm just going to refer to the term MPD going forward. So what are the benefits of having an MPD? It's a good way to streamline your information for nominations. Instead of having to look at different sources for research, different papers, books, articles, things like that, you have all the information compiled into one convenient document under an MPD that you can look at and refer to when writing a nomination connected to it. MPDs established a set criteria for listing associated properties, so they explain what makes a certain property eligible to be on the National Register. It allows for more concise nominations. By providing background information in an MPD, that's less information you have to put in a nomination itself, so you can have a shorter nomination, make it a bit easier to write. And they do help the National Park Service in reviewing nominations. When they receive a nomination for a property that's part of an MPD, they can just pull out their copy of the MPD and review it and see if the nomination meets all the requirements mentioned in the MPD. And they make for a good educational tool as well. MPDs have lots of useful information on the particular historical theme they cover. People can use them for research or writing up their own publications for educational or academic purposes. A lot of people often ask, what is the difference between having a multiple property documentation and a historic district? And there are different times and places for both of these documents, so I'll discuss some of those differences. A historic district typically is a single nomination for the National Register. An MPD is not a nomination, but it can be used to create multiple nominations going forward. With a historic district, you have to have all of your buildings, objects, sites, and structures together within one singular area with contiguous boundaries. It has to be in one single spot. Whereas with an MPD, the resources can be anywhere. They can be any buildings within a particular neighborhood or a whole town, even a county or a state. And they don't have to be adjacent to one another, and they don't have to be in a single contiguous boundary area. A historic district is an appropriate option if there is a single area with collective integrity. If you have one spot with a bunch of historic properties all grouped together and they're all in good condition, then there might be a good case for a historic district. Whereas an MPD is appropriate if you have an area that lacks collective integrity, but there are multiple buildings scattered throughout it that may be individually eligible for the National Register. And districts are appropriate options if there is community support for creating a district. I know sometimes that can be controversial or divisive. So if there are situations where the community does not want a district, but there are still some buildings out there worthy of being listed, an MPD is a good alternative option. One interesting example we have is with downtown Parkersburg in Wood County. In the early 1980s, there was a big debate over the state of historic preservation in the downtown core of Parkersburg. There were historic buildings being demolished left and right, and parking lots cropping up like weeds. And ultimately, the community decided that it did not want to have a whole historic district in its downtown. So, what was done instead was someone created an MPD for historic resources of downtown Parkersburg in 1982, and they nominated about a dozen or so individual buildings in that area. All the purple and gray polygons you see in the map on the left are properties that were listed on the National Register under the MPD back in the 1980s. Fast forward about 40 years later, in the 2020s, there was more support and acceptance of having historic district. So that same downtown core was listed together as a singular downtown Parkersburg Historic District to the National Register. And it's very rare when we see both options utilized for a singular area, so this is an interesting scenario here. The topics of an MPD can be pretty broad or pretty narrow. The sky's the limit to what you can put in an MPD. Some MPDs focus on a particular historical theme. Others focus more on the time period in a given community. And they can cover areas large or small. And we have many different examples here in the state. A very tiny example would be historic resources at Pleasant Avenue. That's a single street in Wellsburg. We have New Deal stone walls in Morgantown from 1933 to 1943. That's pretty narrow as well. A single kind of resource, stone walls in one town. during a single decade. We had coal company stores in McDowell County, which was a county-wide MPD. Frontier Forts of West Virginia, that covers the entire state. And then we recently got one for urban renewal resources in the United States from 1949 to 1974. That is a nationwide MPD. Those are pretty rare, but perfectly allowable under Park Service guidelines. I will discuss what are some of the things that go in a multiple property documentation form. If you want to write one yourself, here's what you will have to do. And as our case studies, we'll look at two recent MPDs. One from our office, Mail Pouch Tobacco Barns of West Virginia, and another by the consulting firm Aurora Preservation Associates, Green Book sites in West Virginia. So MPD forms are divided into sections like a National Register nomination form, but they're divided by letter rather than number. Not sure why, it's just the way they were. But Section E of the MPD is your statement of historic contexts. This is where you'll provide a written narrative of whatever historic context are related to the MPD. So if there's a particular historical event or an architectural style or an important time period or something that you want to include under the MPD, you'll put separate narratives for that here. Each narrative has to include a specific theme, a geographical area, and a time period. So basically a what, where, and a when. The National Park Service says that these contexts have to be developed in sufficient depth to support the relevance, the relationships, and the importance of the properties to be considered. So pretty comprehensive history you have to include here, and the more information you put here, the less you'll need in an individual nomination form. An MPD has to have at least one historic context, but you can have multiple. There's no limit to how many you can include. The Green Book sites in West Virginia MPD had 4 contexts, for example. Just for people who might not know, the MPD was a travel book for African Americans during the Jim Crow era. It pointed out businesses that were safe for Black travelers to visit when on road trips or business trips or things like that. So like hotels, restaurants, barbershops, gas stations that were open to Black people and safe for them to shop at and utilize. So pretty essential guide for traveling in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s for Black Americans. So they got 4 different themes here under this MPD. You have Black migration to West Virginia from 1870 to 1945. That's a pretty good theme. It's got your what, Black migration, your where, West Virginia, and your when, 1870 to 1945. So that checks off all 3 boxes. They also included the role of Black women in West Virginia from 1870 to 1967. The Jim Crow era in West Virginia, 1868 to 1967, and 20th century automobile travel in West Virginia from 1920 to 1967. So all 4 of these themes combined provide a good overall background history of Green Book sites in West Virginia and provide important information for developing nominations. One example in the picture here is the Morgantown Green Book Historic District. It was 3 tourist homes in Morgantown that were listed in the Green Book. And this was listed using the MPD under the context seen here. Section F of the MPD form is for associated property types. So here's where you'll discuss what specific buildings and structures and objects and sites would be eligible to be listed under this MPD. Like what are the properties connected to these historical themes? You'll provide a description of such properties, you'll explain what makes them important, and you'll discuss nomination requirements for them. So it'll state what specific property types can be nominated using the MPD, what areas of significance these properties would be eligible under, and it'll distinguish between what properties are eligible and what properties would be not eligible under the MPD. It'll be important for the MPD to discuss the physical characteristics of the buildings, like their building styles, architectural features, construction methods, building materials, time period, and location, as well as associative characteristics like their connections to important events, people and activities, their historic functions, and just what makes them important. A couple examples here. The Green Book site's MPD included one property type, West Virginia businesses listed in the Green Book. This applied both to residential and commercial properties, like tourist homes, hotels, apartments, stores, barbershops, bars, and gas stations. And it said that these properties were eligible for the history of commerce or transportation and Black history. For the mail pouch barns MPD, we used the theme, the property type, mail pouch barns, sheds, and other rural outbuildings. Basically, any building in a rural area that has a mail pouch barn sign painted on it will fall under this property type. And we argue that they were eligible for the history of commerce and the history of art, because a lot of people consider mail pouch signs to be rural American folk art. Section F also needs to discuss integrity requirements for these buildings and other resources. So describe what specific features should be present on a property for it to still be eligible. And if it's been altered, what kind of alterations are acceptable and what alterations are not acceptable. For the mail pouch barns here, for example, we stated that the mail pouch sign still had to be legible and discernible. It could be faded, but as long as you could still read it and tell it's a mail pouch sign, it would still be eligible, even if the barn has had some alterations over time. Section G is for your geographic data. This is pretty self-explanatory. You just state here what area is being covered under the MPD, whether it's a specific neighborhood, a town, a county, or an entire state. Often this can be as simple as a single sentence. For the Green Book site's MPD, they just had one sentence, the state of West Virginia. And that's all you need, really. You can include a map if you want, especially for a smaller area, but that's entirely optional, as long as you give a good idea of what the area is. Section H is your summary of identification and evaluation methods. This is where you'll discuss the different methods you used for gathering the research and the information for developing this MPD. So if you were using a survey to develop the MPD, discuss how you did that, like your methodology, your field work, your data collection, things like that. Other research methods you want to note too. Did you visit archives? Did you conduct online research? Did you interview people? Did you look at any specific books or newspapers or things like that? You'll note that in the section H. And this needs not be more than a page or two. It's pretty brief, just discuss how you did the work, and that'll be good enough for the Park Service. Section I is your bibliography, pretty self-explanatory. Any sources you consulted for writing your MPD, please include that in a nice bibliography. And it doesn't matter what kind of citation format you use for the bibliography, just make sure it's consistent and provides all the important information. And we'll go through a case study real quick. For our example today, we're using the mail pouch tobacco barns of West Virginia MPD, which our office produced last year. So starting the process, why did we do an MPD on mail pouch barns? Good question. Our office realized that there is a rapid decline in mail pouch barns around the state. There used to be hundreds of mail pouch barns in West Virginia and several thousand across the country, but their numbers are diminishing each year. Today, we believe there's less than 60 barns left in the entire state. So we felt it was urgent to try and document what ones were still left and encourage their preservation for future, generations. And also, we wanted to provide a new educational resource too. There's a couple like coffee table books and online articles out there about mail pouch barns, but not really a single in-depth academic or professional resource on the history of these barns. So we wanted to help fill in that scholarly gap for people. And how did we do the research? Luckily, there's a big grassroots interest in mail pouch barns out there. There is a organization called the Mail Pouch Barnstormers. They're just a big fan club that goes out and documents mail pouch barns. They visit the sites, they take pictures, they make notes about their condition, and they put them in a helpful online database free for anyone to use. I encourage you to look that up in your spare time. It's pretty interesting. We were able to visit the tobacco company in Wheeling that still makes mail pouch tobacco and go through their archives where they have original lease records from when they paid farmers to let them rent out their barn walls to paint signs on. So that's pretty interesting. We did some research in the state archives here in the Culture Center. There's plenty of newspaper articles and other documents about mail pouch barns on file here. And we also reached out to the property owners themselves to see what they knew about their barns. And we got mixed results. Some owners knew the complete history of the barns, when they were first painted, when they were repainted, the who, what, where, when. That was pretty cool. And others didn't quite know much about their barns, but that was okay. We were able to make do with our research. So what do we do for our section E, the historic context of the MPD? We decided just to go with one single historic context to make it easier, and it's a pretty narrow topic anyways. We caught our context the Chew Mail Pouch Tobacco Barn Sign Painting Campaign of 1925 to 1993. This encompassed the history of the Block Brothers Tobacco Company. They were the corporation in Wheeling that invented and marketed mail pouch tobacco, and they were the brainchild behind this very successful advertising campaign, which we also noted. The context also discusses the barn painters themselves and their techniques, how they went about painting the barns, which is a really interesting story. And then it discusses the decline of mail pouch barns and ongoing threats to their preservation. So pretty wide-ranging, comprehensive history of mail pouch barns. For the Section F process, we just picked a single property type, mail pouch barns, sheds, and other rural outbuildings, as I may have mentioned earlier. Just because they're the most ubiquitous kinds of mail pouch advertising out there. There were some advertisements on brick buildings and commercial urban areas, but they're not as common. And often those areas are listed underneath historic districts or other things as well. So we wanted to focus solely on the countryside, rural barns and other similar buildings you might see on farms and large properties. Most were barns, but there are a few exceptions. There's some garages and other outbuildings that have the signs on them as well. We discussed the integrity of these barns. We had to make a few considerations regarding the integrity. There's very few of these barns left, so that makes the ones that do survive even more rare. The signs were the most important part of the barns. So if the barns had been altered in other ways, like there was an addition to a barn, it had a roof replacement, or some of the walls had been altered, that was fine as long as the wall with the sign on it was still intact and the sign was still pretty legible. We did have to concede that most of the barn signs today are in poor condition because they haven't been maintained since barn painting ceased in the early 90s. A lot of them are faded or whitewashed. Some barns are falling apart. So we had to concede that to some extent. So we argued that any barn that has a more or less legible, discernible sign can still be eligible. We argue that mail pouch barns are important under two different National Register categories. One is criterion A, commerce, because they were an important advertising tool for the Block Brothers Company for many decades. These were essential in marketing mail pouch tobacco to the masses. And then we argued for their importance under criterion C, art, because they are widely recognized by many people as important Americana folk art, and because they are the work of a very small group of highly trained painters, including Harley Warwick, who we consider to be a master painter for mail pouch barns. He painted around 20,000 barns over his 4-decade-long career. Some were repaintings. There weren't 20,000 separate barns, but still a very impressive record. We would say that pretty much any surviving mail pouch barn today was painted by Harley Warwick. Anything older is probably faded by now. And what were the results of this effort? We created a document that provides a comprehensive history of mail pouch barns. It has a 5-page long bibliography for further research, pretty extensive. The Park Service approved our MPD at the beginning of this year, 2026, which was great. And we nominated 3 individual mail pouch barns using the MPD. And there's the potential to list more in the future. So if you know of any mail pouch barns out there, please let us know. We'd love to list them if possible. What are some additional things to know about multiple property documentations? They go through the same review and approval process as a National Register nomination. So if someone were to write an MPD, they send it to our office. We review it. We offer comments. We work with them on improving the draft, making as good a document as possible. And then it goes through the Archives and History Commission, which meets 3 times a year to vote on nominations. They'll vote to endorse the MPD. And then the National Park Service reviews it and gives the final yes or no for that. Another thing, nominations that use an MPD can be submitted either at the same time as you create the MPD or any time later. There's no expiration date for an MPD. You can nominate a property using an MPD that was written 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago even, or the same year the MPD was written, just whenever you have the time and resources to do a nomination. And MPDs can be revised and updated like a National Register nomination using an additional documentation submission. So if over time an MPD becomes outdated or you find new information you want to include in an MPD, you're welcome to update it, add new info, and keep the MPD relevant and useful for future nomination purposes. And a couple different resources. The National Park Service has a whole bulletin called How to Complete the National Register Multiple Property Documentation Form. And it was written about 30 years ago, so it is kind of old, but it's still the go-to resource. All the info there is still relevant, still current for our purposes. They have copies available online. If you have trouble finding one, just let us know. We'll be happy to send you a digital copy of that. And they also recently published a little booklet called Best Practices Review for multiple property documentations. This kind of takes the information from the 30-year-old booklet and condenses it into a modern, updated, easier to read format. So that's a pretty good resource to consult as well. I would recommend you look at both of these when writing an MPD because they're both quite helpful. And of course, you're welcome to contact our office anytime too. We love well, I love MPDs. I don't know about our coworkers. And we're happy to see more created because they're a pretty helpful document. I guess that is all I have to share on MPDs. I'm happy to entertain any questions about MPDs or just the nomination process in general. It's a bit quicker than I expected, so my apologies, but maybe we'll get out early for lunch. Let's see.
Thanks, Cody. That's great.
No problem.
Can you hear me? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't think I heard that. It kind of got kind of gibberish.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. I can hear you.
Sorry, it's all screwed up on here because I did end up switching devices, but just checking the chat to see if anyone up.
Mm-hmm. I don't see anything.
Okay.
You have a question, Danielle?
I guess one question that I would have is if you guys have any topics that you guys are going to be working on in the future or things that have popped up that you're like, man, we wish someone would work on this.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. We don't have anything we're working on in-house at the moment, but I would love to see one day an NPD for historic farms in West Virginia. Pennsylvania has a really good NPD for farms in their state. It's very extensive, has all kinds of cool information. And we do get people wanting to list their family farms here all the time. So it'd be great to have an NPD covering that. I'm sure it's a pretty big, broad topic, but certainly one we would love to have more information on to help get more farms listed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that would be especially helpful with some of whenever it comes time, the folks are wanting to see what kind of developments are around that and things that, yeah, sometimes the farmers in the counties will do. I've seen one in Jefferson County, like they have a really nice map that has different layers talking about like what the farm's used for and if it's listed and different things. So the county's more information that would help with that.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions?
Yes, that's a good question, Judith. Is there a list of MPDs done already? There isn't one nationwide that I know of, but we do have a list on our website. I'll drop a link in the chat real quick so I can find it here. Yeah, here it is. Let me put that in there real quick. Yeah, that contains all of our current MPDs. You can click on them and read each one at your leisure. And they also have lists below them of what properties have been listed using the MPDs, which is quite nifty. We have MPDs dating back to the 1980s up to this year.
I might have missed what, did you just say this, whether or not there's a way that you can add to them
Oh, to add to them.
too as well? I think that was the second question.
Yeah, you mean like to make a new MPD or add on stuff to a pre-existing MPD? Oh, I guess I'll answer for both.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a process to update an MPD. You can submit additional documentation to our office. If there's a particular MPD you need add properties onto a current MPD. Yeah, there's a way you can just write up an Asher nomination and use the MPD as your background information for it. So, like, I probably should discuss this more in the PowerPoint, but I didn't know if I could get it done in an hour or so. But yeah, so for the for an individual nomination, you have the section 7, which is the description of the property, and you have the section 8, which is the history of the property. You can have a shorter description and a shorter narrative with a nomination by referring to the MPD. Like, let's say you're listing a school building and there's an MPD on schools in the county, and the MPD discusses like the history of education in that particular county. When you go to write your nomination, you don't need to do a whole history of the school system in the nomination form. You can just say, refer to MPD for history of education in that county. And then you can focus on the school itself with a lot less information. Um, but if you have specific questions about a particular MPD you want to use for nomination, feel free to shoot me an email or a phone call. I'm happy to discuss that. Um, because we would like the MPDs to be used more for nominations. You know, they're there to help you and make nominations quicker and easier to write up. Put my email address in there just in case. Oh, you're welcome.
I did see a question about the AICP credits, and I just wanted to chime in and say that with those ones, you should be able to log into like your dashboard for AICP and say that you attended the course that's on there, but feel free to email me as well if you have questions. And then I wanted to double check because I think this one we had AIA credits. No, this one was just the planners. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. So great to see some planners on. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for joining us. I was saying how smooth things were, and then it logged me off. So isn't that funny?
Whoops. I think you're frozen a little bit.
Uh,
Hmm.
I think I've Lost you guys.
Okay, I can hear you now. You were gone for a minute or two.
Okay, well, I was just going to say thank you to everybody. That if folks need anything, they can always feel free to just reach out. So thank you. Thanks for bearing with the little technical difficulties. Hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take care.
Thank you.
You too.
Mhm.